The next item of business is debate on the Scottish Government's Programme for Government 2019 to 2020. May I ask those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, please? And I call on Rosanna Cunningham to open the debate. For up to 7 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Amazon in flames, temperatures soaring to record levels across Europe, glaciers disappearing, all stark reminders of a world in crisis and real evidence of an emergency. And that emergency does require an emergency response. This programme for government, the capital spending review and the early update to the climate change plan will build on what we have already done. They show clearly just how seriously the Scottish Government is taking this issue. But responding to the global climate emergency is not just about government policies or spend. Scotland's response to the global climate emergency needs to be a truly national endeavour. It will require significant change in what we do and how we do it in all aspects of our daily lives. And by we, I do mean we, individuals, businesses, civil institutions, faith groups, the public sector, and indeed Parliament itself. Everyone will have to consider carefully what more can be done. Yesterday, the First Minister set out the key commitments in this programme for government. She also spoke about the context in which they are given and the political and constitutional emergency that is engulfing the UK. While no deal remains a threat, this government will ensure that we are as prepared as possible while being honest about being unable to prevent all the damage that will ensue. Nevertheless, the Scottish Government cannot and will not simply ignore the needs of our country, the needs of the people of Scotland, while the UK Government seem intent on propelling us towards a harmful no-deal exit from our friends and partners in the EU. This includes responding to the need of current and future generations for us to combat the global climate emergency. This programme for government is a statement of intent which starts to chart the path towards net zero in 2045 and a decarbonised, inclusive and innovating society. It's a vision of the Scotland we want to become. As the Committee on Climate Change has noted, it is also a vision we cannot achieve alone. It is welcome that the UK Government has followed our lead to legislate for a net zero target, but UK-wide policies still need to ramp up significantly. The Scottish Government has repeatedly called on the UK Government to act in areas where we still do not have the powers to do what is needed. There are bold commitments in this programme for government. For example, the £500 million we are spending on bus infrastructure to help transform how we use public transport and start the process of lowering congestion in our cities. Our plans to decarbonise flights within Scotland by 2040, working with Highlands and Islands Airport Limited to achieve the world's first zero-emission aviation region across the Scottish Highlands and Islands. The commitment to increasing our carbon sink with an additional £5 million for afforestation and a total of £14 million this year to restore our vital peatlands. Green finance initiatives will be crucial in achieving our transition and in maximising the opportunities from that transition. We have placed the 2045 net zero target at the heart of the remit for the Scottish National Investment Bank, and we will create a £3 billion portfolio of projects to bring to market ready for green investment. We will continue to prioritise decarbonisation of our energy sources, investing £30 million in a low-carbon innovation fund for renewable heat projects. We will support our farmers and the farming community as it evolves and explores new, exciting opportunities in organic farming and develops pilots to reduce greenhouse gases from agriculture. And supporting our farmers also means maximising our land use and enhancing the potential of every part of Scotland's land, including agriculture and forestry, to contribute to the fight against climate change. At a national level, we will commission independent advice on options for changing land use patterns and practices within Scotland. We will develop proposals for implementing regional partnerships and frameworks, working to enable regional land use partnerships to emerge locally by 2021. And this will help us develop an integrated and strategic approach to sustainable land use. We will also introduce the Circular Economy Bill, advancing Scotland's ambitions for the circular economy through measures that encourage the reuse of products and reducing waste and single-use items. And I know that's something that a lot of people have been waiting for a while. Leading by example, we will accelerate efforts to use 100% renewable electricity on the Scottish public estate. And I'm proud to say that Scottish Water will produce 3 times as much energy as it consumes by 2030 and be net zero by 2040, which is a fine example for the rest of the public sector, but across the whole of our economy as well. I need to say something about biodiversity loss. That and the climate crisis are intimately bound together, and we will make an additional £2 million available to fund further projects addressing biodiversity loss and climate change. And many of the things that we need to do in order to help us reduce climate emissions have the effect of also helping us in terms of combating biodiversity loss. As well as providing a habitat for many species, our marine environment plays an important role in helping to absorb carbon. Next year, we will begin publishing results from our research programme into carbon capture and storage, and we will establish a new virtual centre to coordinate marine climate change science and research in response to the global climate emergency. The step change in behaviour and investment flowing from our response to the global climate emergency presents opportunities for us all. And this programme for government is the next step in our journey towards a more inclusive society, a society that protects this planet and places the well-being and success of its citizens at its heart. With the UN climate negotiations very likely to be hosted in Glasgow next year, Scotland will be at the centre of the next critical conversation about global ambition on climate change. And this will be the most important global conversation since Paris in 2015. As a nation, Scotland must lead by example, and this ambitious programme for government reinforces Scotland's status as a global leader in the fight against climate change. This government's actions will live up to our ambitions for a greener, fairer Scotland.
Call Murdo Fraser, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking the Cabinet Secretary for the spirited fashion in which he's opened this debate, in contrast to the somewhat lacklustre presentation we had yesterday from the First Minister. And this, of course, is occurring on a day when we are seeing £1.2 billion in additional Barnett consequentials coming to this Parliament as a result of spending decisions announced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And let's just hope that the Finance Secretary spends that money wisely in supporting our frontline services, and we don't see that money squandered when he's got a black hole that he still has to fill. Now, yesterday, the presiding officer, the First Minister did not inspire many people with her programme for government. And it was clear at the outset that really the only thing this government cares about is independence. The first bill mentioned in the First Minister's statement, the first bill mentioned by the First Minister yesterday was what? The referendum bill. And indeed, the programme for government mentions the word independence 13 times. And the word referendum appears no less than 25 times. And it's really the only thing that interests them. The only time yesterday the SNP backbenchers woke up was at the mention of the word independence. But as the First Minister has mentioned the referendum bill, let's have a look at what the experts have said about it. And we heard some evidence this morning in the Finance and Constitution Committee. This bill has been slammed by the Electoral Commission, who've said they must have more time to assess any referendum question proposed in legislation, and it should not simply be set by Scottish ministers. It has been slammed by Dr Alan Rennick from the Constitution Unit of UCL, who says, "I have found no well-functioning parliamentary democracy that gives ministers blanket authority to call a referendum by secondary legislation." It has been slammed by the Faculty of Advocates. It has been slammed by the Institute for Government, and it has been slammed by the Law Society of Scotland. If that is the quality of the legislation being brought forward by this government, they really need to up their game, presiding officer. And when it came to the rest of the programme for government, all we saw, not just now, all we saw was a lot of rehashed re-announcements and delays to previous programmes. So we've been promised a Good Food Nation bill before. It was promised in the SNP manifesto in 2016. It was promised again in the 2016 programme for government. It was promised again in the 2017 programme for government, and again in January 2018, Fergus Ewing set out his commitment to the bill in an answer to a question in this chamber. At the fourth time of asking, Presiding Officer, we look forward to seeing this legislation brought forward. The disclosure bill was promised in last year's programme for government, but didn't see the light of day. Last year, the electoral reform bill was promised, but only saw the light of day yesterday morning. The National Manufacturing Institute was announced in December 2017, but only now, they say, work is going to begin. They promised last year to introduce increased sentences for animal cruelty and implement Finn's Law, but again, it is only in the programme for government this year. They said they would begin their parental employability support scheme last year, and they're doing the same thing again this year. They claimed they would publish Scotland's first ever National Action Plan on neurological conditions last year, and they're doing the same again this year. They have delayed the delivery of their funeral support plan, and as I pointed out yesterday, they promised they would sign their contracts for their R100 broadband scheme originally by the end of 2018, and now they're saying they won't sign the contracts until the end of this year. And yesterday, the First Minister could give me no date by which this project would be completed. And in the meantime, households across rural Scotland are crying out for the superfast broadband that the SNP promised would be delivered to them by the end of 2021. If the Cabinet Secretary wants to give way, wants me to intervene, I will give way. If she wants to intervene, she wants to intervene, Presiding Officer. Now, as to the detail in the programme for government, we look forward to scrutinising the bills that come forward. Action to promote the circular economy will, I know, be music to the ears of my colleague Maurice Golden, who can talk of little else. Proposals to decarbonise transport will be interesting. But where are the plans for bold infrastructure projects? For example, to extend our rail network. Where is the plan to reopen the direct Edinburgh to Perth rail line, which would have a transformative effect on transport choices for the whole north of Scotland? I would have thought this is something the Cabinet Secretary, given her constituency interest, would want to take forward. There is a proposal to decarbonise internal flights, but we still have a policy commitment from the SNP to reduce air departure tax. If they have a problem with ADT being devolved, why don't they look at devolving it direct from Westminster to local authorities? If they support local democracy, Treasury have given the way forward how that could be done. That would be a way of empowering local government.
Would you put your card in, please, Mr Swinney?
Oh, I better get my time back, Presiding Officer.
Oh, you certainly can. John Swinney.
It'll just increase the sense of anticipation, Presiding Officer. Mr Fraser is very, very keen to devolve powers to local authorities. Can he remind us how warmly he embraced the prospect of devolving responsibility to local authorities for a workplace parking levy?
Murdo Fraser.
I really think the Cabinet Secretary could have picked stronger ground than trying to defend the car park tax. The hated car park tax. Even its own backbenchers don't want the car park tax. He needs to think again, Presiding Officer. And Presiding Officer, we wait after a long delay for the Scottish National Investment Bank when the Scottish Growth Scheme, which is supposed to deliver £500 million investment, has delivered virtually nothing. Now, I was interested in what the First Minister had to say about the Scottish National Investment Bank supporting the green economy. Will this mean that companies in the food and drink sector or involved in exporting will not be eligible for support? It would be good to get these matters clarified. But, Presiding Officer, this was a programme that was woefully thin. Where were the bold plans to grow the economy? Where were the plans to tackle the 30,000 additional economically inactive adults of working age we have in Scotland relative to the rest of the United Kingdom? Where was the action to tackle business rates and remove the large business supplement, the £65 million a year raid on retail premises? Where is the action to rejuvenate our town centres? Where are the plans to tackle productivity? And if the SNP want ideas on how to improve our economy, I can commend to them the 62 pages produced as an interim report by our own Scottish Future Growth Council, bursting with ideas for how to take this country forward. Presiding Officer, it wasn't really the thin gruel in this programme for government that interested the SNP yesterday, because their interest really was only in one issue, and that is independence. Presiding Officer, oh, there we go. Right on cue, Presiding Officer, is the only time they wake up is when they hear that word. Presiding Officer, the reality is this is a government out of inspiration, out of ideas, out of imagination and running out of time. They have only one thing left that they are clinging on to, and they will quickly learn the Scottish people have no interest in going down that route.
I call Richard Leonard. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. As I reminded the First Minister yesterday, in last year's programme for government, we were told that closing the attainment gap and raising standards in schools remained the government's overriding mission. And yet this summer's exam results show that the pass rate for Highers has fallen for the 4th year running. And time after time, when I meet the parents of children with additional support needs, as I did a couple of weeks ago at the excellent Yard project in Edinburgh, I hear experience after experience of additional support needs not being met, of children and young people and so families being let down by the system, of battles that have to be waged, some won, but far too many lost. And I am sorry, but not as sorry as those families, that the £50 million announced yesterday for ASN just will not cut it. We know that, and the Cabinet Secretary for Education knows that. Since 2012, there has been a rise in the number of pupils identified with additional support needs of over 80,000. And yet the number of specialist ASN teachers has fallen by more than 400 over the same period. So where is the urgency? And where is the investment from this government in additional support needs? Last year, there was also to be new investment in child and adolescent mental health services. And yet we know that out in the real world, the pace of investment is way too slow. Only 1/5 of the promised funding in school counselling has so far been realised. I met a mother in Fife just last week whose son waited 20 months for a CARMS referral. And the First Minister could only commit yesterday to put in place the full complement of 350 school counsellors a year from now. So, another year lost. Now, I raise these concerns not to score political points. I do it because these are our young people. They are our greatest asset, and they are being let down. And I raise it because many of them will not have a second chance. We have to get this right now, because if we break the cycle of austerity and inaction, and if instead we act and invest, we will change the very direction of their lives. The First Minister describes the programme for government as ambitious. My question is, where is the ambition for these young people? The government's rhetoric on climate change is good. We applaud it. But their actions will be the judge of them, not the volumes of strategies and plans that they publish over the next 12 months. So I say this afternoon to the Cabinet Secretary and to the Deputy First Minister that we welcome the renewed emphasis on climate change, but why is there no permanent, statutory, Just Transition Commission involving trade unions and workers to guide it? We need that as part of a national action plan for the economy, not least because of the looming spectre of Brexit. And so it is encouraging to hear the announcement of new investment in bus infrastructure. I visited ADL in Kemlyn just last month. Under new ownership, it continues to be a success story, but we need to ensure that this newly announced public investment in public transport brings a Scottish jobs dividend here, in factories like ADL, in our fabrication yards and in our workshops. We have made no secret of the fact that we think the best way to secure this is by putting passengers before profit and amending the transport bill to open the way for the return of buses to municipal ownership. And can I say to the government ministers here today that you can't declare a climate emergency in April and sit back and allow a critical component of our public transport infrastructure, like the Caledonian Railway Works in Springburn, which has existed as a centre of excellence for over 160 years, to close in July. It makes no sense. Those industrious women and men were let down by an SNP government in their hour of need, and by a political party which in the end showed neither courage nor conviction. And it's not good enough for the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy to declare that government intervention in the Scottish economy is on a case-by-case basis. This is the SNP government's policy, case by case. What we need is not case by case. We need a comprehensive, proactive, forward-looking industrial strategy with a national economic action plan to back it up. One that puts Lanarkshire Steel, Highland Aluminium, with our engineering base, our renewable energy demand, our public transport needs and our public procurement policy. That is what is needed in this programme for government, not a divisive and unwanted referendum bill. I began by talking about the treatment of our young people, which is a measure of the kind of society we are. Another measure is how we treat our older citizens. And so I'm interested that the government wants to develop a future vision for a sustainable care home sector. Over the summer, along with Alec Rowley, I went to Lumfinnans to visit what may be the already existing realisation of that vision. A mini village in a former mining village, combining modern independent living with a warden service, communal spaces, a day centre and a residential care home. It is built and run by Fife Council. It has long been my view that with an ageing population, we need to plan and invest now in exactly this type of provision. And it is my long-held view that we cannot rely on the market, the private sector, or indeed the voluntary sector alone to do it. We need to drive this through the public sector. We need the courage, the audacity of the 1945 generation who had the foresight and the vision to establish a public national health service paid for out of general taxation, free at the point of need. We need to make that kind of leap of imagination with our vision of care for the elderly, a publicly owned care service delivered by properly funded local government. These are the kind of radical ideas that we need to put into practice, ideas whose time has come. And over the next year, we will work with the government when we can. We will hold them to account as we must. We will oppose and resist them when they are wrong. And we will challenge them inside this Parliament, but outside as well, in the battle of ideas, in the clash of values, to deliver what is best for the people of Scotland.
Mark Ruskell, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I start by broadly welcoming this programme for government? Perhaps it sits in stark contrast to the utter chaos and dysfunction of Westminster, but at least we do have a functioning government. And in many areas, from the Fair Work agenda to tackling child poverty, we do have a strong consensus in this Parliament. And even on the biggest question that divides us, independence, the work to update the prospectus on independence will give us all a starting point to analyse and debate the vision and the technicalities of how an independent Scotland would work. Now, we also welcome the government's adoption of the language of the Green New Deal. It even gets a chapter heading of its own, with some old policies as well as some borrowed and some new. We might not yet be on the same page, but we are getting into a better place in this Parliament to debate issues like the future of oil and gas, farming and transport. But let me be frank, though, what's in this programme is not a Green New Deal. Look at the original New Deal that transformed the US economy and the bold Green New Deal currently proposed by Ocasio-Cortez in the US. A Green New Deal has to be transformative. It has to wield the power of the public sector to not just fix markets, but to create an entirely new markets for goods and services. It has to use every lever available to deliver investment. It's not simply some exciting rhetoric to wrap around an existing policy agenda. A Scottish Green New Deal has to be the engine of a just transition, creating new, fairer livelihoods in our institutions, our businesses, our homes and on the land. We can no longer assume that sending policy signals from government will be enough to nudge the private sector. It will require direct intervention from the state. And that means rebuilding the role of the state nationally and locally in areas such as energy and transport, with bold, patient public finance, investing in our commonwealth for the benefit of future generations. But what should this mean, for example, for the homes that we live in? Because heating accounts for half of Scotland's climate emissions, while a quarter of all our people live with a choice of heating versus eating. The programme has some welcome policies in it, but they fail to address the sheer scale of this challenge. Our Scottish Green New Deal that we launched last week proposes a greater ambition. including a programme of deep retrofits and the requirement for all new homes to meet net zero standards. The climate emergency demands an emergency response, not tinkering at the edges. Go to the Netherlands. Their energy-sprung retrofit programme moves at pace. Armies of installers working street by street, community by community. Thousands of homes transformed to warm and affordable net zero homes. The government programme talks about net zero heating by 2045, but Sweden will have net zero heating by next year. A complete decarbonisation using district heating, heat pumps and biomass. Now, the First Minister talked for the first time yesterday about support for the oil and gas sector being conditional on a plan for net zero. Now, I really welcome that shift in language. It's not exactly the position of Jacinda Ardern and the New Zealand government who've ended exploration for new reserves. They've been bolder, but it's a start. But what we see, though, is that the government's objective is shared by the industry today, and it remains maximum resource extraction. At the end of the day, that's a huge, costly gamble on the unproven technology of carbon capture and storage. Now, I recently met with operators of Mossmoran, our second largest greenhouse gas emitter in Scotland, and I learned that there's been no discussions between them and the Scottish Government about carbon capture and storage, and there are also no plans to invest in the technology either. We have 10 years left to tackle climate change. Business as usual is just not an option. We need to plan now for that transition away from oil and gas by reducing the demand and the supply side in tandem together. That's exactly what New Zealand are planning for. That's why a statutory Just Transition Commission is so important in the climate bill as well. The oil and gas industry is not going to end in Scotland this year or next year, but unless we plan now for its sunset in the decades to come, we are letting down the very communities who will remain utterly dependent on these industries right up until the last day of production. Our land is at the front line of both impact of climate change, but it is also uniquely placed to be part of the solution. And this programme is meant to be the response to the climate emergency. But even at the higher rate of tree planting the government is aiming for next year, it would meet its target of 21% of Scotland being forested by 2032, 8 years late. The Scottish Greens target that we've announced of 40%, which is the EU average, wouldn't be met for 150 years. So rather than just topping up the forestry grant scheme, much of which ends up with large landowners, isn't it time the government developed a radical plan to accelerate forest restoration everywhere and encourage more community ownership? And that means questioning why a fifth of Scotland is given over to driven grouse moors, when much of this land could be reforested, creating rural jobs and locking up carbon. It also means putting climate change at the heart of farming subsidy support. Now, this programme announces a rural support bill, but this appears to be more about resisting change to 2024 than putting the climate emergency at the heart of subsidy support today. On transport, we welcome the 500 million for priority bus access investment, but this can't go hand in hand with city deals which are looking to expand road infrastructure. We need to know where this funding will come from and exactly what it will be spent on. The Greens today were repeating our call for 10% of that transport budget to go on walking, cycling. And just last week, an independent review advised the Scottish Government that that funding should double again. Yet these modest asks are being ignored while billions continue to be freely spent on new roads. For the £6,000 million cost of the A9 and the A96 projects, the government could buy 86 new rail routes like the Leavenmouth Link. We have to see a better balance between these priorities in the capital budget. Presiding Officer, Scotland can and must lead the way, transforming our economy through a Scottish Green New Deal so that it works for people and the planet. But if that's to happen, then we'll need to see a much bolder, a much more courageous Scottish Government and Parliament over the coming year.
Thank you very much, Mr Ruskell. I call Alec Cole-Hamilton, 7 minutes or thereabouts. Mr Cole-Hamilton. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to respond for the Liberal Democrats to the programme for government laid out by the First Minister yesterday. Naturally, we welcome a renewed focus on the climate emergency, but that's not really what her speech was about. Indeed, once again and from the outset, Nicola Sturgeon spent the first part of her speech on Scotland's constitutional future, and so therefore shall I. Presiding Officer, there are many questions facing Scotland at this moment in our nation's history, the answer to none of which is independence. Since the vote to leave the European Union in 2016, the First Minister has sought to set the constitutional debate in Scotland as an unambiguous choice between two unions. She intends to force that choice on the people of this country before this Parliament rises. Yet that choice has always been erroneous, and I will tell you why. Several unassailable realities are fast emerging which will block Scotland's seamless re-entry to Europe, and Remain voters need to be crystal clear about the challenges for an independent Scotland seeking that re-entry. Firstly, there is the unanswerable question of Scotland's finances. The government's own statistics released last week reveal that Scotland's national deficit, the difference between our income tax receipts and our expenditure, stand at over 7% of our GDP. Article 126 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union stipulates that accession states must have a national deficit no higher than 3%. Just to get to the races and be considered for membership by the EU, we would need to hike taxes and butcher public spending that would lead to an era of austerity max. Naturally, SNP High Command sought to spin those figures as good news, suggesting that they proved Scotland could just about afford all public spending and a welfare state at current levels and therefore go it alone. Oh, really? Well, who's going to pay for the new embassies we'll need, or our trade missions, or our overseas aid budget? Who is going to bankroll the new Scottish Armed Services? And here's the big one. Where are we going to find over £1 billion each year, which represent 0.7% of Scotland's GNI, that the EU expects as a membership fee? I am a passionate internationalist, like my leaders Joe Swinson and Willie Rennie, and the tens of thousands of people who have joined our party in recent weeks. We believe that Scotland is strongest at the heart of the UK, and the UK is strongest at the heart of Europe. Brexit broke my heart, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to get Britain back into the EU if we leave. But I will not meet the loss of one international union I care about by junking the other one on the insubstantial promises of this administration. I am tired of this First Minister and her government misappropriating my vote to remain as justification for another divisive independence referendum. The choice between two unions has always been a false one, and it was led to a paralysis of government.
I don't know who heard you. I certainly didn't hear you. Can I say to other members, I want to hear what Mr. Cole-Hamilton has to say. Bear with me a minute. You may wish to rewind a little if that's written so I can tell. And the official report.
I would be very happy to.
I say to members, if you wish to make a comment, intervene. Mr. Cole-Hamilton. Mr. Mason.
Could the member explain to the Chamber why he spent half his speech talking about Scottish independence when the First Minister yesterday didn't spend anything like half her speech speaking about Scottish independence?
Mr. Cole-Hamilton.
It is the elephant in the room in everything this government decides. I will rewind, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so. I am tired of this First Minister and this government misappropriating my vote to remain as justification for another divisive independence referendum. The choice between two unions has always been a false one, and it has led to a paralysis of government which has starved all other policy considerations of oxygen, areas which should have front-loaded the First Minister's speech, but once again played second fiddle to her lifelong obsession with separation. Presiding Officer, the speech of a responsible First Minister, one committed to the well-being of the people of Scotland, should have commenced with a laser beam focus on all of the scandalous failures of public policy by her administration. That those children waiting more than a year for first-line mental health support have trebled. That suicide in young people is up 50% last year alone. That drug deaths in Scotland are the worst in the whole of Europe, that in the Year of Young People, this government failed to meet the international minimum age of criminal responsibility and was rightly criticised on the world stage for it, that passengers in my constituency still can't get to work because of cancelled or overcrowded trains, that a hospital that has been for children 7 years in the making lies empty, unfinished and hemorrhaging money, that a publicly funded childcare offer to parents looks very unlikely to be deliverable next year, and that patients still receive letters saying that their operation will happen in 12 weeks by law, only to discover that the wait will be more like 50 weeks. I could go on and on and on. This is a powerful index of incompetence and is symptomatic of a government whose tactical focus has been exclusively on the same thing for 12 years and more, that the false necessity for Scotland to leave the United Kingdom should be the first thing to leave Nicola Sturgeon's lips in her speech yesterday represents a dereliction of her duties and the office she holds. She used that speech to stoke the fires of independence again, just as control over Brexit was finally snatched from the Conservative government. Boris Johnson's defeat in the Commons last night suggests that the tide may be turning against Brexit. I am grateful for the cooperation of Nicola Sturgeon's MPs have shown opposition parties in that enterprise. As such, stopping Brexit in that Parliament should be the alpha and the omega of the constitutional debate right now. The outcome of that struggle will not be determined in this Parliament, but the answers to those failures of her government's public policy will. This should be the focus of our efforts. Independence is not the lifeboat the SNP would have Remain voters believe. So I ask this government to abandon this sideshow today. Put your shoulder to the wheel on the catalogue of public policy areas crying out for your attention. Presiding officer, there is a muscle memory to these exchanges now. For the party of government, the union is still the cause of all ill and independence our salvation. On such occasions, opposition members who want to retain Scotland's place in the UK respond as I have done today. These debates are exhausting and not a single one of your constituents or my constituents is any better for it. We were all of us elected to this Parliament because our communities put trust in us to act in their best interests, to meet the challenges and threats they face and to build a society in which they can prosper. With every countless hour that is wasted reheating the debates of 2014, we are failing to meet the test of their expectation. At the start of my speech, I talked of the many questions facing Scotland at this moment in history. If the First Minister and her party continue to present just one answer, wholly unsuitable to all of the public policy challenges we face, then her government deserves to fall, and fall it will.
Thank you. I have to say to members, and I'll repeat, if you're disgruntled about a contribution from a member, intervene. There is time for interventions. I think it's quite cowardly sometimes to just shout and not intervene and make your point. I say that across the chamber. If you wish to do it, intervene. Otherwise, we can't hear what the member is saying. I call open debate, 6-minute speeches, some time for interventions, which I would encourage. Angela Constance, followed by Liz Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amongst all the chaos and controversy from Westminster, it was somewhat of a comfort to return to the normality and the routine of our Parliament, where on the first day after summer recess, as normal, we were back to business with the government laying out their plans and we in turn having the opportunity to fairly and rationally question and scrutinise and debate. In other words, getting on with the day job on behalf of our constituents. And it was clear to anybody who was listening that responding to the climate emergency is at the very heart of this year's programme for government. And I'm sure the First Minister won't mind me pointing out to Mr Cole-Hamilton that she did speak at length yesterday about the climate emergency that we face. And I do have to concede that environmental politics is not my hinterland. It's not where I started from. And it was on entering this Parliament 12 years ago, and if I'm candid, all the engagement we do with children and young people on the issues that matter most to them that has over the years opened my eyes. And I used to feel somewhat overwhelmed by the social and economic and the climate chaos that will be unleashed if we don't roll back on our misuse of the planet's resources. But what is now more visible than ever before is that we now have a much more connected and collective approach to tackling the climate challenge. And the fact that the programme for government is more task and investment focused gives me more hope, or at least makes me feel less powerless. And there are some very important building blocks with the Scottish National Investment Bank and its primary mission to help us transition to a net zero economy. There's a massive investment, a massive new investment in public transport, and specifically buses. Energy efficiency will also benefit from £500 million investment, and increasing the spending power of infrastructure investment is important as well. And I, on a constituency note, was very glad to see £30 million in a low-carbon heat fund, given that Mitsubishi is one of the biggest employers in my constituency, and they manufacture air conditioning and heat pumps. And it's also good news that new build housing from 2024 will be heated from renewable sources. And all of this and more is absolutely central to what is my political heartland, which is fairer work, more affordable and warm homes, and along with our new social security powers that now benefit 90,000 people in Scotland, there is that real sense of impetus, along with the big ticket items, the Best Start grant and the child payment, that we are on the road to reducing poverty and inequality. But like many people, given the current UK environment, I worry about our future more than I've ever done. I worry about whether we have enough powers to protect our democracy. I worry whether we have all the levers to meet all of our ambitions when you have one government that is giving and another that is taking. But all of this increases my resolve to work harder and, yes, making the case for independence. We do live in a democracy, I'm entitled to do that, but also to find ways to do more with our existing powers and resources. And turning to that point, I very much welcome the commitment to the Good Food Nation Bill. West Lothian Food Bank report a 40% increase in demand since the rollout of Westminster's universal credit. And I would hope that we could all agree that we will never be rich as a society until no man, woman or child has to rely on food banks. And I do support the calls by Nourish Scotland, the Scottish Food Coalition, and all those respondents, 1,400 to the bill's consultation, calling for the incorporation of the right to food into Scots law. And I do accept entirely that it's far easier to legislate than it is to deliver rights in the real world. But we have to end hunger and poor nutrition in 21st century Scotland. And as well as hunger, we also have a problem with obesity that we need to face up to. And I very much support the government's work on healthy eating and the need to tackle multi-buys and heavily discounted food with low or no nutritional value. I do, however, have some concerns about potential unintended consequences, which the Minister for Public Health has been kind enough to discuss with me. Patterson Arran in my constituency employ 200 people, and as most people know, Patterson Arran produced shortbread. Now, I'm not for a minute pretending that shortbread is anything other than a treat, but it is worth bearing in mind that there is 17% sugar in shortbread compared to 52% in a Kit Kat, for example. And big confectionery companies will spend a huge amount of money on advertising, the regulation of which is reserved. Meanwhile, we propose to limit in-store promotion and free samples, which may disproportionately impact on small to medium-sized companies who, like Patterson Arran, are just trying to sell more shortbread around Christmas and Hogmanay. So I hope as we move forward that we really will consider the evidence and the impact and how all of this fits with our food and drink strategy. And my final point, Presiding Officer, is I am very delighted to see progress with the Elective Treatment Centre at St John's in Livingston. And I am delighted to endorse a programme for government that's getting things done and having the courage to face up to the longer term and setting out what our longer term challenges and goals should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Liz Smith to be followed by Gillian Martin. Ms Smith, please.
Thank you. Can I use my time this afternoon to set out some key policy commitments which the Scottish Conservatives believe should be the education priorities of this government? Firstly, let me start with the very good news that was confirmed this afternoon by the Chancellor, that there will be significant Barnett consequentials coming as a direct result of the boost to school spending in England and Wales. A boost that will see £325 million coming to Scotland for financial year 2020-21. So I hope that John Swinney will agree that that money is not only very welcome, but that it can go some way to restoring teacher numbers. In recent weeks, we have seen some encouraging signs in some local authorities about improved teacher recruitment, but the fact remains that total teacher numbers are still down by over 3,000 since the SNP came to power. And in particular, we know that there remain key shortages in certain subjects and, of course, in additional support for learning, which was highlighted earlier by Richard Leonard, because that has seen a decline of 26% across primary and secondary over the last 10 years. Now, I'm only too well aware that you cannot just train teachers overnight, but what this additional money should do is to help the teacher training process and address some of the issues of retention and supply, which have been highlighted by our schools and by local authorities. Because the recent complaints from teaching staff were not just about salaries, an issue that the Cabinet Secretary addressed before the parliamentary recess, but they were primarily about workload. Workload that has increased for lots of different reasons, but often because of teacher shortages in the system. So I challenge the Cabinet Secretary to tell us what he will do with these additional financial resources to address parents' concerns. Good. Yes, of course.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way, but I just wonder, is she arguing basically against devolution so that this Parliament should not decide how the money is spent based on a whole range of priorities, including education, or should we just accept whatever Westminster tells us?
Liz Smith.
Far from it, Mr Mason. These Barnett consequentials have come as a direct result of the increase in education spending south of the border. There will be consequentials that go to the Scottish Government. I'm making the very strong plea that that should go into helping the teacher shortage situation, and I don't see why there is a problem with that. Secondly, we said very firmly a month ago that there is surely a very genuine case to try to improve National 4, which, as we all know, is suffering from a lack of status. Too many young people are leaving school without the necessary exam-accredited qualifications to their name in basic literacy and numeracy. And that's a point that has been highlighted by employers. The Scottish Conservatives believe we are very much on the side of parents and teachers when we call for basic exam-accredited qualifications in these areas so that all young people can read, write and count to a good standard and have these good quality qualifications behind them. Accredited qualifications that not only enhance the confidence of the young people, but make them much more attractive to the job market. I think that's something that's been well received by many. Yes, of course.
John Swinney.
I wonder if Liz Smith would clarify for me whether she believes that the accreditation of learning can only be undertaken to deliver confidence if there is an examination associated with it.
Liz Smith.
No, far from it, Cabinet Secretary, but it is part of it. It is a fundamental part of it. And the message that is coming back, and which we've had at the Education Committee several times, is that the National 4, the actual qualification, is not met with the credibility that it should have and is deserving. And that's the issue. We've had it many times at the Education Committee, and that's something that we feel you should be, the Cabinet Secretary should be investigating and taking very seriously. And with that, can I come to the issue of subject choice and the Scottish Government's plea that we should not look just at the exam passes gained within individual years, but within the entire senior phase as a 3-year progression. And as I've said before, I think there is some attraction in the theory of that, but the current practice is a problem. Because of the narrowing of subject choice in S4 and the similar effects that that's having on S5 and S6, it is creating gaps in some of the well-rounded education on offer in our schools. Because if there was a properly thought-out progression and full articulation between different courses, we would not see schools' reluctance to offer young people the chance to sit a higher across 2 academic years. We would not see the 2-term dash to higher, and we would not see the diminishing number of pupils able to access the advanced higher. And the advanced higher, as the Cabinet Secretary knows, is very much one of the shining lights in Scotland's education, much valued by people elsewhere. Jim Scott's ongoing analysis of what's happening in subject choice is stark, and that is surely something that concerns the Cabinet Secretary, because it draws into question some of the structures under the Curriculum for Excellence, and I hope that will be reviewed very quickly. And let me finish on the point about skills participation and apprenticeships, which are so crucial to the overall direction of travel. There are clearly some very good things happening in this area, but it's not enough, which is why the Scottish Conservatives want to see much more commitment and support given to young people to the age of 18. If they have left school and not gone to college or university or to a job, and they're in a structured apprenticeship or a traineeship, then that surely has to be something that is beneficial. And we need to do much more to encourage our entrepreneurs like Jim McCall in all their efforts to get more of the disengaged young people into structured training. Presiding Officer, can I finish my remarks on focusing on what I believe are the priorities of young people, of teachers and of the public? That's where the focus of this Scottish Government should be when it comes to education.
Thank you very much. I call Gillian Martin, to be followed by Sarah Boyack. Ms Martin, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last night, like many of you, I was glued to my television watching the goings-on at Westminster, or as I like to refer to it, the season finale of the United Kingdom. In between the Prime Minister's calamitous speech and the emergency debate on suspending the UK Parliament, some poor MP had a 10-minute rule debate, which next to nobody was listening to. It was on air quality. Poor chap, he was bookended by high political drama and the denouement of 3 years of Tory Brexit civil war. What chance did he have to draw attention away from that to environmental issues in a place which has hardly passed any relevant legislation in the past 3 years, with a government that's limped along doing next to nothing, particularly when it comes to tackling the biggest issue of our time, climate change? What a contrast to yesterday's scenes here, as the First Minister laid out our programme for government, which had climate change at its very heart. A 158-page programme of meaningful policy and legislation that will be enacted and fast. This is what a functioning government and parliament looks like. And it's easy to forget such a thing exists if your eyes are only fixed on Westminster. As the convener of a committee who has spent the last year scrutinising the climate change bill and producing a comprehensive list of recommendations on how to reduce emissions, I was delighted to see so many of our asks put into action yesterday. For a long time now, I've been convinced that the private sector has to be incentivised to help us reach our climate ambitions. Without them, we'll simply fail. So the announcement of measures in the Green New Deal is big news and has real action behind it. The Scottish National Investment Bank will have at its priority lending for net zero projects. The procurement of public contracts will be dependent on environmental criteria. A huge growth, acceleration funding and support will be available for emissions-reducing infrastructure. And Scotland has a chance to be a world leader, not just in meeting the target of net zero by 2045, but being a green innovation nation, which creates the technology that we can export to others as we undertake that journey. And the announcement yesterday of a £3 billion portfolio of projects to attract investors into renewables, low-emission transport solutions, waste management and construction that locks in carbon rather than emits it is of staggering significance. Alongside this journey to becoming a net zero country, we have a huge opportunity to create thousands of jobs. And this just transition away from burning fossil fuels is of particular importance to my area of Aberdeenshire, where so many of us rely on oil and gas for our living. And I welcome the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan, and it's a scheme that must have a very firm foothold in my part of Scotland. The North East already boasts the biggest concentration of transferable engineering and technical skills in the whole of Scotland, but we desperately need to provide the low-carbon career routes and skills for tomorrow for the kids in the schools in my constituency today. Their parents might have worked in oil and gas production and services, but young people sat in Ellen, Inverurie, Turriff, Mintlaw or Meldrum Academy right now could be the future hydrogen engineers fueling our freight transport or the key to cracking the battery storage challenge for renewable energy. As an animal lover, I also welcome the Animal Welfare Bill, and I want to particularly make mention of a small part of it that has got resonance from my constituency. Tucked away on page 32 of the PFG is an announcement that animals seized on welfare grounds can be rehomed without the need for a court order. And this is in line with best practice in other Northern European countries. This year, 2 constituents of mine were jailed after over 100 dogs and their pups were seized from horrible conditions in their illegal puppy farm near Fyvie. Court action took 2 years, and in that time those dogs were cared for in shelters. With this legislation, this need never happen again. Dogs will be rehomed or sold and will not live in limbo. And I want to thank the SSPCA for their lobbying in this over the years and for the government for their response. It really does mean a lot to us in my area. I also welcome moves to make bus travel infrastructure greener and more reliable. But for those of us in rural areas, the expansion of the electric vehicle charging network and the low-carbon transport loan scheme means that ordinary people, particularly rural people, can think about purchasing a used electric vehicle rather than it being an unrealistic pipe dream. This is a real meaningful step that will enable a lot of us to move away from petrol and diesel and play our part in meeting the climate challenge. Presiding Officer, electrification of our existing railways is great news, but I will continue to campaign for the reopening of the Formartine-Buchan line in my constituency to give my constituents more low-carbon public transport options. The First Minister promised that she would make climate a government priority when she declared a climate emergency. And she has delivered a programme for government that proves that she's true to her word. Presiding Officer, these are the policies that will propel Scotland into a low-carbon future with huge opportunities for our people and are in line with what the people of Scotland have been asking us to prioritise. And it will ensure that no one is left behind in that transition. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I call Sarah Boyack. I welcome Ms Boyack back to the chamber. This is her first speech here and will be the last, of course. And I call Alec Neil afterwards. Ms Boyack.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. No pressure there. I'm delighted to have the privilege of serving in our Scottish Parliament again, and I want to put on record my thanks to Kes Dugdale for the work she did in this Parliament, and I'm also particularly looking forward to working with my Labour colleagues Daniel Johnson and Neil Finlay as we support our constituents across the Lothians. Over the past month, we've been working on affordable housing, on health issues, in particular the uncertainty facing families in relation to the delays of the opening of our Sick Kids Hospital, and the concerns of parents in relation to access to mental health services for their children. I said in May that I had unfinished business, addressing our climate change emergency, tackling poverty and the crisis of affordable housing in Edinburgh. When I was working with the SFHA, I had the opportunity to see at first hand the quality of affordable social housing being built across the country and the empowerment that comes from involving tenants in shaping their communities and, crucially, the economic benefits that come not just from building new homes, but also investing in existing homes to make them warm and energy efficient. But there is so much more that we need to do, in particular delivering on the challenge of eliminating fuel poverty so that no one has to suffer from the choice of heating or eating. A quarter of our children now live in poverty, and households are becoming homeless every 18 minutes, and we can see a widening gap in health inequalities. So we need to make sure that the issue of tackling poverty is addressed with urgency alongside our climate emergency. And there is a huge amount to absorb from yesterday's programme for government. Scottish Labour warmly welcomes the focus on tackling our climate emergency. It is an emergency, and it's not a choice, but an absolute necessity that we invest in all of our infrastructure to make it low carbon and resilient, to deal with the challenges that even in Scotland, we are not at the forefront of the climate difficulties that are going to come. Even in Scotland, we have to plan for. So ensuring that new procurement investment and the work of the Scottish National Investment Bank focuses on delivering zero emission investment is welcome. But I would argue we need multiple benefits to be delivered. So more opportunity for apprentices, decent wages, and for communities to benefit from that investment directly. We need to tackle climate change and deliver quality jobs at the same time. A great way to do that would be a properly funded programme of retrofitting to bring all of our homes up to the standards mentioned by the First Minister yesterday, reaching right across the country. Think of the local economic opportunities. And we need much more rapid progress on renewables and heat projects based on communities across the country. And there are lots of opportunities for community-based co-ops and community companies to deliver. We've got lots of good examples. Aberdeen Community Heat and Power Company, not-for-profit since 2012. Our Edinburgh Solar Co-op, which is now working in partnership with the City Council. And we've got community renewables in probably everybody's constituency across the country, but we need more. They deliver multiple benefits, and they need to be factored into all of our planning decisions, so we get the low-carbon heat and power we need now, as well as reinvestment in our communities. I also welcome the investment focus on low-carbon transport that was made yesterday. It's an area where we have seen nowhere near fast enough progress in reducing emissions. But again, we need to go further and think about empowering our communities so that local people can access shared electric vehicles. They don't all have to buy electric vehicles, so that we can have municipal bus companies again, so that we can have high-quality, affordable public transport, and so that we can have more routes that reach out to where people currently do not have that opportunity. And crucially, that we link in healthier, affordable public transport choices with active travel opportunities, walking and cycling, and more electric bikes too. We need to have our communities at the heart of our low-carbon industrial revolution. That's what Scotland needs. That's why in Labour we welcome the new Just Transition Commission, but as Richard Leonard said earlier, it's got to be not just a short-term group, it's got to be there for the long term, so that we always have a focus, always reminding government that delivering investment has to deliver for people and our environment. And I just want to finish on the issue of our local authorities, crucially important if we're going to deliver that programme announced yesterday. I very much welcome the announcement of the tourism levy. It's not a new idea. I was working on a Members' Bill in 2016. Can ministers commit to it being in place by the 2020-21 elections? Our local authorities need that opportunity now. Let me just give you the example of our capital city, and just the example of how much the reduction in funding by ministers is hitting hard. In our capital city, we have seen a reduction per head of funding by the Scottish Government of 7.5% over the last 5 years, at a time when our population has increased by over 7%. And that means that there are cuts at a time when our communities need more investment. We're losing homes to Airbnb, even though we're seeing new homes built. We're losing homes while the cost of land is increasing. And that means that vital infrastructure and new homes are more expensive. So we need to see more progress in community empowerment, the land reform agenda, and proper funding for local authorities and the communities that they serve. And local authorities have a crucial role to play alongside the Scottish Government in public sector leadership if we're going to see the change delivered that we need in every community across Scotland. The coming months are going to give us the opportunity to test the detail of the plans yesterday, to scrutinise them in detail. I welcome the Circular Economy Bill, the Good Food Nation Bill. We have to make sure that the investment that is coming forward will tackle our climate crisis, but that it will also repay wider benefits, that it will also address the long-standing and deep-rooted inequalities that should not be acceptable to us and hold us back as a country. Thank you.
I call Alec Neil to be followed by Maurice Golden. Mr Neil, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. There is much to welcome in the programme for government yesterday, but in particular, can I welcome the £500 million commitment to investment in buses in Scotland? And can I particularly, because the emphasis a bit yesterday was on urban buses, and that's absolutely right and fair, but there is also an issue around rural bus services. In my own constituency, in villages like Harthill, Shotts, which is a town, Glen Mavis, Caldercrooks, Plains, Salisbury, in all of these areas, the problem is the closure of bus services or the running down of bus services. So as part of the £500 million, can I ask the government to look at a greater subsidy, because that's what it takes on a permanent basis to keep many of these services going and to reopen others. And of course, in rural areas, because of the distances involved, the carbon savings from getting more people to travel on the bus are very significant indeed. And there is one very specific proposal I would ask the government to look at. There is an excellent service in Lanarkshire and it operates in other parts of the country. In Lanarkshire, it's called MyBus, where anyone over the age of 75 can get the bus to come to their door to pick them up, to take them where they need to be, and then bring them back to their own door. The problem is it is restricted to people over 75. Can I ask the government to look at lowering the age at which subsidy for that becomes available? Because there's a lot of spare capacity in these buses, and it seems a shame, particularly where it's being subsidised, that we're allowing them to travel very empty and a wee bit more subsidy and reducing the age level and broadening it out a bit would actually tick a lot of boxes.
Neil Findlay.
Intervention. Of course, I think I would agree entirely with what he's said so far in his contribution, but that would require local government getting an increase in funding in order to subsidise and develop these routes and develop these projects. We have to end the cuts to local government and increase the funding for the likes of North Lanarkshire Council to enable them to do that.
Alec Neil.
I would envisage a fair chunk of the 500 million set aside and announced yesterday for buses to actually be channelled through our local authorities. And I think this is a good example of where that can be done for service enhancement. So I think there's a lot that can be done there, Presiding Officer, to the benefit of everybody. But I want actually to concentrate my remarks today on the wider economy. Because I think one of the things that clearly emanates from yesterday, and it's been referred to already by Gillian Martin and by Sarah Boyack, are the economic development and job opportunities that come from the carbon reduction programme. And it seems to me those opportunities are not just to create jobs locally, but to create many more jobs and gain expertise at a national and indeed international level. And I think one of the things we really need to do is to exploit through Scottish Enterprise and similar agencies the maximum economic opportunity that comes from the programme outlined yesterday in relation to carbon reduction. Because there is no doubt at all that technology in all its forms, whether it's improved insulation in housing or improved efficiency of cars and more electric cars and electric vehicles, right across the board, the expansion of that technology, much of which is actually developed in Scotland, could not only be used to reduce carbon emissions, it can be used to create many, many more new, well-paid jobs that have an international export market and create opportunities for people, particularly our young people. And can I say, one of the other priorities I think that needs to be addressed is the skills shortages in a number of our key industries. For example, in the IT sector, in Scotland, it's estimated every year we need about 12,000 new IT graduates just to stand still. But only about 4 or 5 IT graduates are graduating every year. So every year there's a deficit of about 7,000. Now, there are jobs. That's to stand still. So I think if we close that gap, we would have many more people, not just young people, people of all ages, being able to fill those jobs. In the construction sector, it is estimated there's a shortage of about 12,500 people, primarily in the so-called wet skills. And again, there are huge opportunities there. And that would allow us to incentivise people in lower paid, less skilled jobs to go up a skills ladder into areas like IT and the construction sector, where there are literally thousands of job opportunities and where actually the wages are very good. We have a shortage of train drivers who I believe have an average wage of about 45 grand a year. Think of applying for a job myself, Presiding Officer, and I'm sure people would support me and give me a reference. But that's an example of where there is real opportunity to have a real ambitious skills ladder which fills jobs that need to be filled and gives people in lower paid jobs the opportunity to go up that ladder in terms of career development. There are many other things I would like to have spoken about, Presiding Officer, including the challenge from artificial intelligence, but I'm sorry, I'll need to leave that for another day, because you're about to tell me I've run out of time. Thank you.
I think you saw me put my glasses on. That was a hint. I call Maurice Golden to be followed by Claire Adamson. Mr Golden, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to refer members to my register of interests. It is right that climate change features strongly in this programme for government. As ever, I welcome the ambition the Scottish Government has shown in wanting to tackle climate change. Ambition that has no doubt been spurred on by unprecedented public concern. I am sincere in saying it is also regrettable that the SNP government falls short of delivering on that ambition. I highlighted a litany of failures last year, hoping they might be given the attention they deserve. Sadly, little has changed. For example, as things stand, their target of recycling 60% of household waste by 2032 will be missed by 12 years. The proposed 2021 landfill ban is wildly off target and could end up costing Scotland more than £1 billion and could see Scotland having to ship waste to England or indeed abroad. On biodiversity, there is more inaction, with 13 of 20 international biodiversity targets missed. A biodiversity baseline would help us protect our wildlife. I raised the matter 3 years ago. The First Minister stood in this chamber in May and agreed with me, yet we are still waiting for action. Transport too has floundered, with emissions having barely reduced in almost 30 years. The SNP have promised to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2032, but so far just 1% of Scotland's 2.9 million cars are electric. Not that the SNP government have been set an example for Scots to follow, however, with just 20% of Scottish government vehicles being electric as well. And then we have the proposed deposit return scheme, which is also looking to come up short. Despite their model having never been tried anywhere in the world before, the SNP claim it will be fully operational with 90% efficiency in little over 1 year. More worryingly is the lack of detail about the new system. On support for small businesses, the impact on curbside services, access for vulnerable groups and compatibility with the rest of the United Kingdom. No detail on any of it. A deposit return scheme could cut waste and bolster recycling, but for that to happen, the Cabinet Secretary must start providing the public and businesses with the answers they deserve. If we are to achieve net zero, transform to a circular economy and protect our environment, the SNP must focus on results. This can be done in partnership with the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is decarbonising faster than any other major economy. A colossal £52 billion has been invested in renewables, 400,000 low-carbon jobs have been created, 50 million trees have been planted, and protection has been given to an area of ocean the size of India. Scotland has the ambition to match, and the Scottish Conservatives have the policies to deliver, some of which the Scottish Government have now performed a U-turn and are now supporting. For example, reducing fuel poverty and giving everyone a warmer home by raising energy efficiency standards to EPC Band C by 2030, a measure that was put forward by the Scottish Conservatives. Moreover, support for climate action through public procurement, such as mandating purchasing zero-emission vehicles where possible. And public procurement is an area which has sadly been lacking in attention, and it shouldn't take a climate emergency to ensure that we get the best value through Scottish Government procurement. Moreover, we have to tackle poor air quality with air quality monitors at every Scottish school. We also have to back our farmers with funding and technical support to modernise equipment and be greener. We have to ensure renewables and decommissioning jobs stay here in Scotland and create new ones by ensuring Scottish workers build the new deposit return schemes machines. And we also want to turn plastic waste into an asset with a new plastic recycling plant, again providing jobs here in Scotland. On some of these, we should common ground with the likes of Friends of the Earth and WWF, and I hope the Scottish Government can equally find common cause with us, because together we can help deliver the results that Scotland deserves. But before I close, I would like to say something about animal welfare. I welcome developments such as increasing cruelty to sentences to 5 years. I also welcome those sentences applying for service animals after our successful Finns Law campaign. Working closely with the Scottish SPCA, Dogs Trust, Kennel Club and others, I know they want to see this Parliament go further than it has. Many members are also passionate about animal welfare, and I share this view. The upcoming Animal Welfare Bill is an opportunity to deliver for Scotland's animals. We should aim for nothing less than Scotland having the best animal welfare laws anywhere in the world. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr Gold. I call Claire Adamson to be followed by Miles Briggs. Ms Adamson, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise to speak today with a tale of two cities, where the difference in performance of London's Westminster Government could not be more in contrast with that of our Edinburgh Government. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The best of times in Edinburgh, where we see a programme of government that will transform for the better the lives of our citizens, as opposed to the worst of times, where we have a Westminster Government obsessed with dragging Scotland out of Europe, inflicting untold damage to our economy, our social cohesion, and to our EU New Scots. Presiding Officer, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. Wisdom comes from an SNP government intention to put climate change emergency at the heart of all it is doing to progress our society on behalf of the people of Scotland. The foolishness is an attempted proroguing of Parliament and a hurtling headlong off Brexit cliff edge. Deal or no deal, there is no such thing as a good Brexit. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. Belief comes from measures to tackle climate change, poverty and reduce inequality. Incredulity comes from months of stagnation at Westminster as it is caught in the headlights of a constitutional crisis. The epoch of belief is also about measures for ending homelessness, initiatives to tackle holiday hunger, the early introduction of the Scottish Child Payment, grants from the Scottish Welfare Fund, schemes for period and full poverty, discretionary housing payments, council tax reductions, the expansion of early years childcare, a new statutory body on poverty and inequality, and of course a new Social Security Scotland agency built upon dignity and respect. The epoch of incredulity is that while we are working so hard to tackle poverty, we are forced to mitigate the punitive and degrading social security system for Westminster that has given us the bedroom tax and the rape clause. We are facing a climate emergency. We need people and we need skills and we need collaboration. Scotland can be rightly proud of its record on tackling climate change, and we have already exceeded our target of producing 50% of our electricity needs from renewables by 2015. In 2018, 74.6% of gross electricity consumption was from renewable sources. Investment in walking and cycling in Scotland has been doubled to 80 million per year. In tandem with continued investment in rail electrification and building upon our comprehensive network of car charging points, this will greatly reduce Scotland's carbon emissions and put us well on our way to phasing out diesel and petrol cars by 2032. However, it is the investment in people and skills that I welcome and take most from yesterday's programme for government. I welcome the Scotland's Future Skills Action Plan, which was published yesterday, but the commitment to develop a specific climate change skills plans to ensure that Scotland is equipped to deal with the climate crisis and that we have the skills needed to take on the new economic advantages that will come from new investment in renewables. I also welcome the commitment to 30,000 modern apprenticeships. Presiding Officer, as someone who has worked with care-experienced young people throughout my time in this place as a member of the Education Committee, I was particularly pleased to see the investment in care-experienced young people by the government. The care-experienced bursary age limit has been lifted. There will be free dental care for care experienced young people, 24/7 crisis support for young people in Scotland, and access to discretionary housing payments for young people in receipt of a qualifying benefit. Earlier in the summer, I visited the Who Cares Scotland summer camp. I spoke with many young people there who were willing to share their concerns, their experiences with me, so I could better understand their challenges as care experienced young people. So I know how important the commitment to a statutory presumption in favour of siblings in care being placed together when it is in their best interests will mean to so many young people and so many of their siblings in Scotland. And can I put on my record my thanks to Amy, who shared her poem at that event, which was poignant, heartbreaking, and helped me understand better her challenges and the challenges faced by care experienced young people. So I'm absolutely delighted that that is part of the programme for government. Presiding officer, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. The light comes from the many organisations who have welcomed this ambitious and important programme for government. Colleges Scotland, NUS Scotland, Who Cares Scotland, Citizens Advice Scotland, and the Poverty Alliance, to mention just a few. The darkness comes from the unknown Brexit black hole that we all approach with trepidation. I said before, there is no such thing as a good Brexit. Whatever happens, we will have major challenges ahead in our country. We don't have a clear vision ahead, but thank goodness that independence offers Scotland a choice of the best of times.
Thank you very much. I want to remind members that the protocol is that you stay for 2 speeches after your own, unless it's an emergency, of course. Otherwise, you send a note in advance to the chair, the presiding officer, who will then say whether or not it's okay that you leave the chamber. But you don't just do it and send a note after the event. That is directed at one member, but the rest of you can tent as well. I now call Miles Briggs, to be followed by James Dornan.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. If there's one thing which stood out in yesterday's programme for government, it was the fact that the First Minister did not have very much to say about the NHS. And the lightness of that programme for government, I think, really spoke of 20 years in this Parliament's history. And it's little wonder the First Minister perhaps did not want to talk or attract attention to her time as Health Secretary, given the record of this SNP government in running our health service. Over the summer, we saw yet more evidence SNP ministers are simply incapable of providing the leadership required to improve the performance of our NHS. NHS waiting time targets continue to be missed. The 12-week treatment time guarantee, which has never been met, was missed again. For the quarter ending June, over 1 in 4 patients did not receive treatment within the 12-week target. The 18-week referral time was also missed, with only 79% of patients seen within the referral to treatment standard during the month of June. And the number of NHS patients in Scotland who've had to wait longer than they should for critical diagnostic tests has continued to increase. Meanwhile, in August, Audit Scotland's report revealed that this SNP government is still ill-equipped to help address Scotland's GP crisis now and into the future. It confirmed that the government is struggling to recruit the extra 800 family doctors which we'll need over the next decade. The report stated the Scottish Government has not set out what impact these additional GPs will have or how the target reflects retirement rates or changes in working patterns. It has not provided an assessment of how policy initiatives will contribute to reaching the target or identified what the risks are if they are not achieved. With a third of GPs over the age of 50 and changing workforce patterns, meaning more family doctors are now working part-time, it's clear that after 12 years of this SNP mismanagement of our GP workforce, we are now looking at a GP retirement time bomb in Scotland. No wonder, therefore, that RCGP Scotland was right to call this programme for government a missed opportunity to tackling Scotland's GPs' concerns. Very briefly. Yep.
Alec Neil.
I say to the member, it's now accepted by the BMA and others that the single biggest contributing factor to the reduction in the availability of GPs is because of the pension reforms introduced by George Osborne, which have had a devastating impact on the National Health Service.
Miles Briggs.
And that's exactly why the UK government has announced changes to take forward that and make a difference. And it's interesting that the Cabinet Secretary who opened this debate isn't here right now. Over the summer, a GP surgery in Bridgeverne closed. Maybe she wants to be back to also intervene in this debate. Presiding Officer, this summer has demonstrated the real challenges facing our health service, from the unacceptable and shocking record drug deaths to ongoing crises across our mental health services. And here in my own Lothian region, we've seen the ongoing scandal and the very last-minute cancelling of the much-advertised opening of the new Sick Kids Hospital, something that caused real distress and anger for staff, patients and families across my region. Despite SNP promises that a new children's hospital would be open in 2012, all these years later, and following delay after delay, we now await the Health Secretary's statement next week to find out when, at long last, we will see the safe transfer of patients and services to this much-needed facility. My constituents across Lothian want answers. Answers to how we have seen such mismanagement of this project. Next week has to be the point SNP ministers start to provide those answers. Presiding Officer, just yesterday we saw the publication of some of the worst ever NHS workforce statistics. And sadly, nothing in the programme for government suggests the SNP have any ideas to put forward on how to turn this around. Nursing and midwifery vacancies have broken the 4,000 barrier for the first time, a 28% rise in the space of just 3 months. Today, there are 328 fewer nurses and midwives working in Scotland's hospital than the last quarter. Consultant vacancies have reached the highest level, breaching the 500 mark for the first time. And of the 514 empty consultant posts we have across Scotland, they have now lain empty for more than 6 months. SNP ministers have been warned about this NHS workforce crisis for years now, and their continuing complacency means that more and more patients in Scotland are waiting longer and longer for treatment. Elsewhere in this programme for government, we hear about the promised Glasgow and Edinburgh major trauma centres. These have now been promised 3 times in different programmes for government. Similarly, we are promised again this year that Scotland will have the National Action Plan for neurological conditions. Patients and patient groups have been waiting for this for too long. We need to see progress this year. If SNP ministers are going to preserve any credibility, we need to see these promises kept and not just re-announced year upon year. And a statement from the SNP that they will continue to fund the extension of Frank's Law rings very hollow in light of the SNP-led South Ayrshire Council's decision to use that money allocated for other purposes. To conclude, Presiding Officer, I know many of my constituents in Lothian and people across Scotland will be genuinely disappointed that once again the programme for government fails to set out proposals that will help actually equip our NHS for the long term and help to meet the healthcare challenges that our nation faces. Scottish Conservatives will continue to work with our fantastic but hard-pressed NHS staff to develop the fresh thinking and new policies to help safeguard our NHS in the future. After 12 years in office, it's clear that the SNP has nothing to offer to take forward our NHS.
Thank you. I call James Dornan to be followed by Monica Lennon. James Dornan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a pleasure to be able to speak in today's debate at a time when Westminster's consumed by Brexit and the Tories are playing out a political version of Jonestown. It's great to see the Scottish Government's new and exciting programme for government published. The policy announcements, of which there are many, will make Scotland a fairer, more prosperous and greener country for all. It's incredibly encouraging to see the range of different bills unveiled for the coming year, and I look forward to, in particular, seeing the hate crime bills progress through Parliament due to my interest in eradicating sectarianism. There is an impressive 14 new bills set to be introduced, which is nearly the same number of Labour shadow cabinet reshuffles over the last 2 years. Presiding Officer, as I said, these announcements will make Scotland a greener country, and it's on this subject I wish to speak about today. This programme for government builds on Scotland's already strong, world-leading foundations in tackling climate change and cutting emissions. We were the first country in the world to declare a climate emergency, responding to the calls of youth climate strikers and scientific experts. Our emissions have almost halved since 1990, and we continue to outperform the UK and most Western European nations in delivering reductions. And in 2018, nearly 75% of Scotland's electricity came from renewable sources. As Lord Debon, the chair of the Committee on Climate Change, said in May of this year, Scotland has been a leader within the UK with many of its policies to tackle climate change. However, as a party, we want to go further and end our contribution to climate change completely. Scotland's transition to net zero will affect every part of society, from how we travel to how we use our land. For example, in Scotland alone, around 9.5 million tonnes of CO2 each year are removed from the atmosphere by our forests, which is why an increase in tree planting is so important in the fight to tackle the climate emergency. I was therefore very pleased to see that in this year's programme for government, there's an announcement of an additional £5 million to increase our tree planting target from 10,000 hectares per year to 12,000 hectares, starting from next year. Regarding our travel habits and infrastructure, there are a number of exciting and ambitious commitments, including the maintaining of the doubled level of active travel investment, the target of decarbonising Scotland's railways by 2035, 5 years ahead of the UK's target of 2040, and also the announcement to plan to change sections of the motorway network around Glasgow to better support high occupancy vehicles such as buses. Presiding Officer, these are encouraging steps being taken by the Scottish Government to address climate change. However, Scotland cannot deliver net zero emissions through devolved policy alone. We require the UK Government to vastly up their game. We need the private sector support, and we also must continue our partnership with the public sector, and in particular that with local authorities. As outlined in the programme for government, the Scottish Government will now put in place a Green New Deal, harnessing the power of the Scottish National Investment Bank, a £3 billion green investment portfolio, and a green growth accelerator to attract green finance to Scotland. As a result of this, our local authorities will be able to further invest in emission-reducing infrastructure for their area. Scotland and the Scottish Government are quite rightly seen as world-leading in addressing climate change. However, I also wish to pay tribute to the work of Glasgow City Council. In particular, I would like to commend the work of Councillor Anna Richardson, who represents the Langside ward in my Glasgow Cathcart constituency and is also the city convener for sustainability and carbon reduction. As a city, Glasgow has made significant progress in reducing emissions, meeting our 2020 target ahead of schedule, and the Council are undertaking great work to do more, much of which is on the back of previous programmes for government. As members will be aware, the initial phase of Scotland's first ever low emission zone was launched in Glasgow last year. In the city centre, restrictions are now in place for certain buses, and a further phase is set to commence next year. Understandably, a positive and direct effect of the low emission zones is the increasing demand for ultra-low emission vehicles and an increasing demand for electric vehicle charge points. At present, there are an estimated 100,000 electric vehicles in the UK, and this is expected to rise between 1 and 1.4 million by 2020, at least a tenfold increase. As referenced in the programme for government, to support this expected increase, the Scottish Government has already delivered 1,500 new electric charge points and has assisted businesses and communities in buying ultra-low emission vehicles. This has laid great foundations for Glasgow City Council, who have also been awarded £2.2 million by Transport Scotland to improve infrastructure for electric vehicle charge points. Of course I will.
Neil Findlay. Neil Findlay.
I thought you were rethinking, Neil.
Of course, the issue of climate change is the biggest issue facing humanity, but I've been very surprised that no one on the government benches has mentioned the issue that I think must be at the top of the agenda in Scotland at the moment, and that is the drug crisis on our streets. Mr Donnan's a Glasgow MSP. I don't know if he was going on to mention it. I sincerely hope he was, because there's 1,200 people dying on our streets and there's an HIV epidemic in Glasgow. £10 million is nowhere near enough to deal with this. And I would hope that people who represent cities like he does will lobby the government to increase the money to try and address what is the carnage that's happening on the streets of this country.
James Dornan.
Okay, thank you for that. No, I wasn't going on to mention it in this speech because I am working with others in Glasgow to do what we can to try and alleviate that situation. There's obviously lots that have to be done. Some of it's reserved powers. You know that the safe houses, the Westminster Government won't give us the power for that. But there's a lot the Scottish Government are already doing. I'm not denying for a second it's a huge issue and something that we all have to look at working with. But I'll be working outside of this speech. This speech is about what was in the programme for government and what I want to deal with. Okay, I don't even remember where I am now. It was so long ago since you started. As referenced in the programme, as at present there is estimated 1,000 electric vehicles. By maximising the availability of charge points to electric vehicle drivers in the city, Glasgow City Council, in partnership with the Government, will continue to support a low-carbon transport infrastructure and will facilitate the steady growth of electric vehicle users in the city. But the Government has committed to going further still. They're set to provide an additional £17 million to support the demand for ultra-low emission vehicles through the low-carbon transport loan scheme, while expanding the scheme to include used electric vehicles. Presiding Officer, the climate emergency is embedded in almost every policy and strategy being taken forward by the SNP Government. The programme for government, building upon the work already taken, will take massive strides towards our goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045 at the latest, a target which is more ambitious than that of any other UK nation. This is an ambitious government which is going from strength to strength, in complete contrast to the Tories at Westminster. As a Parliament, we're debating a detailed and progressive programme for Scotland. The Tory government can't even control their own parliamentary business programme. If this week hasn't shown our constituents anything, it's that no party other than the SNP has a positive plan for Scotland's future.
Thank you very much. And I call Monica Lennon, and we'll move to closing speeches after that. Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As Scottish Labour's health spokesperson, I wish to begin by saying that the programme for government contains several positive announcements that are very welcome. Investment in perinatal mental health support for new mums, a 24/7 system of support for young people experiencing mental health issues, a dedicated women's health plan to reduce inequalities, and the publication of the first ever National Action Plan on Neurological Conditions. These are all examples of steps in the right direction which will help thousands of people across the country. Scottish Labour called for the establishment of a Women's Health Fund in the budget this year, so I'm delighted to see ministers commit to bringing forward this plan. My question is, what funding will be attached to this? The cross-party group on women's health, which I chair alongside Deputy Convener Alison Johnston, has persistently highlighted a range of women's health issues, from differences in women's cardiac treatment, menopause stigma, to the struggles faced by those with endometriosis. And in lipedema, Anne Henry has bravely spoken about her painful battle to receive a proper diagnosis and treatment. So will the plan improve access to specialists for conditions like lipedema? But, Presiding Officer, these glimmers of positivity do not offset the real and pressing issues facing our NHS and the health of the nation. 12 years into government, SNP ministers must know they are still falling short on too many fronts. This programme for government boasts of so-called record levels of spending and staff numbers, but the facts speak for themselves. The NHS workforce crisis is deepening, with figures this week revealing the highest rate of medical vacancies for 12 years. The current increase in training places will not do anything to fill the unfilled vacancies, putting pressure on services right now. Thousands of children and young people waiting for more than 4 months to be seen by mental health services, and many still being rejected for treatment outright. Setting out standards and specifications on CAMS to reduce rejected referrals. Again, why has this not been done in the year since the rejected referrals audit? When will they be in place? And what change in CAMS referrals and rejections is expected? Audit Scotland warning that the financial stability of the NHS is increasingly unsustainable, as boards are expected to make more and more cuts whilst dealing with a seemingly ever-increasing demand. And there's a £900 million repair bill. Dedicated NHS staff are overworked and stressed, and we're expected to be 850 GPs short of where we need to be in 2021. So what work has been done to address Audit Scotland's concerns and criticisms, and to determine if the programme for government's policies will achieve what they're intended to deliver? The cancer strategy is getting refreshed, but is a new strategy planned, and if so, when will it be published? The cancer strategy was supposed to be a £100 million investment, but the programme for government says that only £54 million has been spent so far. What will happen to the remaining £46 million? In the real world, there is a disconnect between the rhetoric of SNP ministers and the tough experiences of many patients and NHS staff. Take the drug death crisis that my colleague Neil Findlay has mentioned. In the programme for government, ministers assert that they are doing quote, all we can, unquote, to prevent further drug deaths. That is just not true, because we can and we must do much more. People who desperately need help now need so much more than a glossy document. They need action and urgency, and a culture change spearheaded by this government to boost services, to reduce stigma and to improve coordination between addiction and emergency mental health services in every single community in Scotland. Yes, this government is taking positive steps, but it must move more quickly, because it's not good enough that the Drug Death Task Force announced in March has still to meet, and I know we'll hear more from the Minister for Public Health tomorrow. Meanwhile, there are more and more people suffering from poor mental health and substance misuse, and they cannot afford to wait any longer. And if we look at private sector failure in the NHS, the programme for government references the ongoing debacle which has taken place at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, which Sarah Boyack mentioned, and Sarah Boyack mentioned the new Royal Hospital for Children in Edinburgh. But on both, Scottish Labour has consistently called for a public inquiry. It is an absolute scandal that the safety of patients and hundreds of millions of pounds of public money has been put at risk. It's not just the problem of these huge capital projects which are an issue. We've seen the hand of private profit damaging our health service in various guises in recent times. Take healthcare environmental services based in Shotts in my region. That scandal has caused a clinical waste crisis with tens of millions of pounds of extra cost for our NHS. It's disappointing that the government dismissed outright proposals from Scottish Labour to bring this service back into public ownership, instead handing a 10-year £100 million contract to a multinational private company. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, our health service and NHS workforce remains in crisis. This programme for government does not fully address the scale of the challenges and offer the step change required to transform our health service. Services are under overwhelming pressure. The government must go further and take bold, progressive action to support our NHS to tackle inequalities and falling life expectancy and to improve the health of the people of Scotland.
Thank you very much. And we now move to closing speeches. I call on Liam MacArthur to be followed by John Finney. Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Well, Alex Cole-Hamilton observed at the outset of this afternoon's debate. It didn't take long for the First Minister yesterday to reveal what is at the top of her agenda. She's hardly turned the first page of her statement before we had the first mention of independence and an assurance, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, that Nicola Sturgeon is intent on separation, do or die. The truth is, though, that the answer to Boris's nationalism is not more of Nicola's nationalism. That said, once we got beyond the inevitable demand for more constitutional division, many aspects of the programme outlined by the First Minister were worthy of welcome. It was encouraging, for example, to hear the First Minister acknowledge the challenge that we face in meeting the climate emergency and the urgent, radical and cross-cutting action required in response. The detail of that response, of course, will be crucial, as I think Mark Ruskell and indeed Sarah Boyack, in a typically thoughtful contribution, highlighted. Scottish Liberal Democrats certainly stand ready to work with the government and those across all parties to ensure we do meet that challenge. I was particularly interested to hear the commitment made in relation to air travel in the Highlands and Islands to be carbon neutral. I know Loganair, which operates most of the routes in the region, has long held this ambition and appears confident it can indeed be achieved by 2040. But these are lifeline services, and it is imperative that in delivering the commitment, ministers ensure that accessibility and affordability remain at the fore. People and businesses in communities like Orkney, which depend on these routes, must not be left more isolated or disadvantaged. But this ambition, along with plans for hydrogen ferries in Orkney and making the A9 Scotland's first electric vehicle superhighway, show the clear potential for the Highlands and Islands to lead the way when it comes to reducing transport emissions. Sticking with the transport theme, I couldn't help noticing that certain items appeared to have slipped the First Minister's mind yesterday. I listened intently to what she had to say, but heard no reference to a 3-year freeze on Northern Isles ferry fares or a 20% reduction on cabin costs. An urgent resolution to internal ferry funding for the Northern Isles was also conspicuous by its absence from the FM's transport priorities. As for an increase in freight sailings, a long-term extension to the air discount scheme, and the removal of car parking charges at Sunbury Airport, it was as if those promises had never been made by the SNP in the recent by-election campaign. But the fact is, they were. Moreover, people in Shetland and Orkney were listening with interest. So they heard Nicola Sturgeon commit to sit down, quote, in pretty short order and see how we can implement these pledges. They took careful note when Michael Matheson called the SNP candidate's promises on transport very reasonable. And they made the assumption that these were indeed commitments to Shetland and to the Northern Isles, and not merely cynical bribes in the hope of persuading people to put aside their opposition to independence and vote SNP. Surely now that almost every single member on the SNP benches has a newfound appreciation both of the beauty of the Northern Isles, but also how much it costs in time and money to get there and back, they'll be happy to support delivery of all these transport promises to the communities that Beatrice Wisher and I represent. Presiding Officer, it should concern every single one of us that here in Scotland we lock up more people per head of population than almost any other country in the Western world. The prison population last month stood at a staggering 8,267, with two-thirds of our prisons at or well over capacity. This is unsustainable, unsafe and unacceptable. We've seen a 40% increase in assaults in our prisons over the past year. The number of self-harm incidents has doubled since 2017, while attempted suicides are set to be 3 times higher this year than last. Meanwhile, back in July, the SPS announced it was redeploying its entire through care team into general prisoner officer roles. How can this possibly help with the successful management of prisoners back into the community? And certainly will.
Finlay.
I visited Shotts Prison during the recess and spoke to prison staff there about a range of issues, but the one thing they wanted me to take away with me was the lack of staff in prisons to deal with the day-to-day work and the pressures that they are under. I hope he will join me in urging the Justice Minister to address this urgently.
Lee MacArthur.
I think that's a very fair point. The concerns being raised by staff are not new, and they're not, I think, confined to Shotts. I think it's a direct result of the increase, the spiralling increase in the prison population that's putting pressure not just on the prison population, but the staff working there. Add to the levels of incarceration of women, the lack of capacity and mental health support for prisoners, particularly our young people, and the picture is a bleak one. Presiding Officer, I support moves by the Justice Secretary in terms of increasing the presumption against short sentences, extending the use of electronic monitoring, but I would question whether the government really is alive to the scale of the crisis we face. Moreover, there is still no sign how ministers plan to transfer the resources into areas that will allow us to bring down that prison population by diverting people away from the criminal justice system. We know this is more effective in reducing reoffending, in keeping our communities safe, and in allowing every individual the best chance of making a positive contribution. It cannot be done cheaply, but the cost of continuing as we are is so much higher. On drugs deaths too, as Monica Lennon said, we are at crisis point. There were 1,187 drug deaths in Scotland in 2018, the worst rate anywhere in the developed world. Scottish Liberal Democrats believe the response to this must be framed through the prism of health rather than justice. But when we know that last year more people were imprisoned for possession of drugs for personal use than were given treatment orders, something is not right. Presiding Officer, these are just some of the areas where the government and this Parliament has its work cut out, not just over the next year, but well beyond. These should be the priorities for action, priorities on which there is the strong prospect of good cross-party agreement. We should be committing to these rather than reopening the divisions on independence. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call John Finney to be followed by Ian Gray? John Finney.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. And I think it's been an interesting debate. And as ever, there's been lots of requests for additional detail. I'd like to start by commending a number of elements that's included in the programme for government. First and foremost, one I don't think anyone else has mentioned, and that's the £2 million additional money for the Gypsy Traveller community. And I'd like to commend the Minister, Kevin Stewart. I think there's been really significant movement and engagement with the Traveller community who have been impressed with that. So I welcome that. I also welcome the policy of the Young Carer Grant, which is a green policy being brought forward. And as my colleague Mark Ruskell talked about the Heat Networks Bill, perhaps unfortunately the focus appears to be on regulation rather than transformational change, because that transformational change can be significant, as is the case in Amsterdam, 100,000 houses and 8,000 a year. The Good Food Nation Bill, now the original intention of that bill, and thank goodness it's here, the original vision was of a cross-portfolio legislation and improving access to healthy, affordable food, bringing food into health, environment and social justice agendas, indeed the right to food. And I did see someone say in relation to that, let's hope it's not a watered-down marketing ploy. Clearly procurement, and that was mentioned by someone else, needs to be sorted, and the idea of lorries driving past food producers to deliver processed foods to our schools hopefully can be addressed. Quite some distance travelled in a few months since this chamber voted down the Scottish Green Party's declaration of a climate emergency, but that's welcome. The STUC responded to the programme for government by saying, and I quote here, the current market approach to decarbonisation has failed. And I think that's a very valid position. And we know that all the other parties in this chamber here have positively extolled the UK government to give ever-increasing additional tax breaks to the obscenely wealthy oil and gas sector, who today were celebrating the increase in the drilling activity. Apparently more wells drilled in the first 7 months of this year than in the whole of last year. And they go on to argue that maximum extraction must continue and is compatible with net zero thanks to carbon capture and storage. Not quite how we see things, I have to say. And as the STC also went on to say, to be worthy of the name Green New Deal, there needs to consider the role of publicly owned energy, transport and construction companies. And words are very important. My colleague Mark Ruskell talked, in fact, he said he welcomed the Scottish Government's adoption of the language of the Green New Deal, adding that the programme is not a Green New Deal. Transition away from oil and gas by reducing the demand and supply in tandem, as the New Zealand government are planning for, is the way ahead. So, as ever, we see a modest incremental change dressed up in grand rhetoric. The Scottish Green New Deal is different, publicly owned national bank and energy company. A New Deal should be a transformational programme of building the public sector and redirecting massive investment into infrastructure. And the programme for government is a long way from the bold and transformative change we need and want to see a commitment from the government to work with us to try and embolden the approach that's been taken. Now, a lot's been made of the quoted sum of £100 million improved bus priority infrastructure. And clearly that's one area where we would welcome a lot more detail. I know Mr Neil talked about some of the implications for that. It's to apparently tackle the impacts of congestion on bus services and raised bus usage. Where's that money coming from? How is it going to raise patronage out with areas with priority infrastructure? What's it going to do for residents in remote and rural areas? The reality is it's not going to make buses any more affordable or accessible to people. And the Scottish Government has failed to address the decline in bus usage by expanding the concessionary travel scheme. Now, the Scottish Green Party advocate fully free bus services. And it's perhaps disappointing, reassuring that there's some thought going into it, but failing to take even a modest step of introducing free transport for under 26 is disappointing. Trying to work out how that infrastructure money might be spent. If you take, for instance, the City of Inverness, which has modest bus prioritisation, but a council that positively encourages the public to drive into a city centre where there already is poor quality and notwithstanding environmental impact assessment. It shows that there needs to be coordination not only of local policy, but the coordination between national and local policy. We need local transport strategies, and that's a key element of the workplace parking levy that would dovetail with national strategy. So what is the Scottish Government strategy in relation to transport? It is to continue, not slow, let alone abandon the £6 billion expenditure on two roads in the north. Now, what they need to do, what the government need to do is re-examine all its existing policies. Page 92 says, embed sustainable travel principles. Well, there's a dearth of that apparent. Now, as to the mode of propulsion of a vehicle, of course, it doesn't matter what propels it. Congestions caused by vehicles, so whether it's diesel, petrol, electricity, we need a situation where the government needs to set traffic reduction targets. I mentioned earlier about publicly owned the requirement for public ownership. That needs to be of our bus services, absolutely needs to be of our bus services, our rail services and our ferry services. And that could lead to better integration. And we are a maritime nation. We have a growing and ageing fleet. We have the issue of 2 ferries at the moment. We have a lot of ferries to replace. The provision of that can't be left to the private sector. And as I did yesterday, I would urge the Scottish Government to nationalise Ferguson's Yard. In the short time I have left, there's a lack of ambition here. Where's the mobilisation of the public sector? Where's the new jobs? The active travel budget is frozen. Is it 6 or 7 minutes, Presiding Officer? Oh, I do beg your pardon. Well, if you does me just for 2 minutes, please, or 1 minute.
Try 30 seconds, Mr. Finney.
Yes, thank you. We have the emergency. An emergency is a crisis, a disaster, a tragedy, a danger, a trauma. We've had warm words but unambitious targets, none of them suggesting there's a crisis at hand, none of them suggesting there's the disaster that's befallen our planet and our nation is being addressed, none acknowledging that we're already seeing tragic effects of increased extreme weather, none acknowledging that we are actually in danger if we don't address this forcefully, none acknowledging that we have to act in the trauma faced by our environment. The future generations are going to judge us on these words, not on these words, but on our actions. And sadly, the programme for government does not read like the response to a declared climate emergency. Thank you, President Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Finney. I call on Ian Gray to be followed by Dean Lockhart. Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As always, the test of a programme for government is the degree to which the reality matches the rhetoric. Although, to be honest, this year's statement fell pretty flat on rhetoric, never mind reality. Indeed, this is probably the one and only time of the parliamentary year I rather miss the First Minister's predecessor, whose rhetoric on these occasions seldom failed to soar. I remember, of course, the Saudi Arabia of the seas, and then there was the vision of Scotland one year, not so much cold, wet and dreich, but rather the foremost hydro nation on the face of the planet. All rubbish, of course, florid fantasy, supercharged by high-octane hyperbole, but, well, a bit more entertaining than yesterday's rather dull fare. And I say to Claire Adamson yesterday, I had no great expectations when the First Minister got up to speak, and I was not disappointed. There was some welcome stuff, of course, not least the very welcome agreement to the interim recommendations of the Care Review on health, childcare and education for care-experienced young people. Very welcome indeed. And welcome too a focus on addressing the climate emergency, but I'm not sure that the programme actually contained an emergency response, although I think, in fairness, the Cabinet Secretary did make a better fist today in opening the debate to try and demonstrate that it did. But in there is an updated plan, an updated energy efficiency route map, a hydrogen plan, an offshore wind policy statement, and these speak of bureaucracy rather than urgency. I thought Mark Ruskell rather eloquently debunked some of the government's rather vainglorious claims on climate change. And I think that Sarah Boyack showed exactly why the return of her knowledge, expertise and experience in this area is going to be such an asset to this Parliament. Meanwhile, in the critical area of public transport, the government still failed to grasp the nettle of public ownership of our buses and railways. Now, we may be electrifying our railways, and 3/4 of passenger journeys may be on electric lines, but while we tolerate the cancellations, the late trains and the overcrowding, there is ScotRail, who today again have defaulted on their latest improvement plan, then passengers will not want to use them. My own constituents today in North Berwick found all their trains cancelled, yet again, and that is the experience of most of us, is it not? And as for buses, bus lanes and low-emission buses are very, very welcome. But until we're prepared to extend subsidised or indeed free bus travel to other groups of passengers, passenger numbers will continue to fall. And I say to Alec Neil, the private bus companies will never resolve the issues of rural bus routes that he quite correctly raised. And I say that coming from East Lothian, where when the private bus company moved out, a municipal bus company has come in and transformed bus travel. And that is the nettle that we must grasp. The trouble with things being a programme for government priority, of course, is so often it turns out to mean very little in reality. Last year, we were still being told that the government's overriding priority was education, closing the attainment gap, raising standards for all. Yet, as Richard Leonard pointed out, higher pass rates fell again this year for the 4th year in a row. And although the government assert that the attainment gap has narrowed, they have abolished any sensible means of measuring it at all. There's no new money either in yesterday's statement to restore this government's cuts to education. School budgets, £400 million less than they were in 2010, and that includes the PEF funding, supposed to be additional but really backfilling cuts. That £15 million for additional support needs goes nowhere near, about a tenth of restoring the cuts to funding for those pupils over recent years. And that is an emergency too for those children who only have one chance at school. The response is not adequate. And my colleagues Neil Findlay and Monica Lennon are right too. The drug death figures, they are an emergency too, and £10 million is not an adequate response. Last year, one of the flagship commitments, and it is an important one, in the programme for government was the incorporation of the UN Convention of Rights of the Child into Scots law. But we're told this year there will be no legislation. There's no explanation for the delay. Why can't we get on with this important consensual move? And while we're on rights, I agree with Angela Constance that the Good Food Nation Bill should contain the right to food. But it doesn't. Why doesn't it? And I hope that she will argue with her government that it absolutely should. Now, the weekend, the First Minister promised a calm, considered and consensual programme. The truth is, for calm, we got pedestrian, and for considered, we got unambitious. And as for consensual, well, if her statement had climate change as its centre, the First Minister began and ended yesterday on our one true passion, independence. There is nothing calm, considered and consensual about wasting time on a referendum bill, about seizing one constitutional crisis to try and stoke another, about sowing new division where healing is what our country and our communities need at this time. In this, the programme for government is the same as every one of the past 12. Not really about climate change or education or health or poverty. It is about independence, always the top and hem of this government's story, with patients, pupils, parents and passengers left behind.
I call on Dean Lockhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me start by congratulating Sarah Boyack on her excellent first contribution in this current parliamentary term. And the background to this debate is, of course, that we are now in the 13th year of SNP government. And surely this is enough time for any government to show whether or not it can make a difference. And what a difference the SNP has made to Scotland. Declining education standards and international rankings in Scottish education, as highlighted by Liz Smith, declining education standards, the NHS in crisis, as made clear by Miles Briggs, the low wage, low productivity and low growth economy described by Murdo Fraser, and a dysfunctional transport policy which has caused the insolvency of the last shipbuilder on the Clyde. It's no wonder, Presiding Officer, that earlier this week a leading global shipping company accused the SNP of running Scotland like a banana republic. Not a record to be proud of, as the First Minister claimed yesterday, but a record to be ashamed of. And this programme for government will change nothing. It's a programme for government with the same old promises which never get delivered. Like the Scottish Growth Scheme, promising £500 million of investment in the economy, but 3 years later, as the First Minister herself admitted yesterday, only a quarter of that money invested. Like the promise to create a new publicly owned energy company to reduce energy costs. But 2 years later, this policy hasn't even passed the feasibility test. Like the SNP's economic targets, promising to take Scotland into the first division of productivity, but instead seeing us relegated to the third division. And it's not just productivity. The SNP has failed to meet every single one of its own economic targets. And that's the reality of the SNP's track record for the people of Scotland to judge. Targets missed, policies undelivered, and promises broken. And yes, I'll give way.
Kate Forbes. Kate Forbes.
I was just going to ask who was responsible for Scotland having the lowest unemployment in the UK.
Dean Lockhart.
It's a combination of the UK government and Scottish government. Because I'll tell you why. Because under the UK government, interest rates are at record lows. And I'll come on to the economics of independence and how that would damage the Scottish economy shortly. Presiding Officer, let me turn to some of the detailed policy announcements made by the First Minister yesterday and debated today. The First Minister announced, as we've heard, a new Scottish growth deal, new Scottish Green Deal, which will lay the foundations for sustainable economic growth. Now, to many, this might sound like the policy of a new incoming administration, but we all know that the SNP has failed to deliver sustainable growth over the past 12 years. This was made clear by the STUC earlier this year in its report, Broken Promises and Offshore Jobs, and I quote, "The SNP has failed to ensure that workers, business and government in Scotland benefit from Scotland's natural resources and low-carbon economy." The STUC report also highlights the negative balance of trade in the low-carbon sector in Scotland. We import £230 million more than we export in the low-carbon economy. Gillian Martin and Alex Neil said the Green Deal will allow us to create new jobs and increase exports to other countries, but the reality is we are currently subsidising the low-carbon economies of other countries, and we're not seeing the real economic benefits of Scotland's natural resources. I need to make some progress. The First Minister also announced yesterday that the SNP's policy on taxation is aimed at encouraging business investment and economic growth. But again, the reality paints a very different picture. According to the Fraser Founder, business investment in Scotland has been declining since 2015, long before Brexit. On taxation, the SNP has broken key manifesto commitments by increasing the basic rate of income tax and council tax, and economic growth in Scotland under the SNP for the past 12 years is a full 6% lower than the rest of the UK. But, Presiding Officer, what is most remarkable about this programme for government is what it fails to mention. In the 160 pages of this programme, there is not one mention of the state of Scotland's finances. So let me remind the Chamber about the state of Scotland's finances, as set out recently, 2 weeks ago, by the Scottish Government's own figures. Scotland now has a record fiscal deficit of £12.6 billion, equivalent to 7% of Scotland's GDP. We now have the highest ever gap in the fiscal position between Scotland and the rest of the UK. And we have the highest ever union dividend for the people of Scotland, equal to every single person in Scotland receives £2,000 a year as a result of Scotland being part of the UK. And this, I'll make progress, this union dividend will increase even further as a result of the record increase in public spending announced by the Chancellor today, an extra £1.2 billion for Scottish schools, the NHS and other public services. Presiding Officer, yesterday the First Minister told the Chamber that the SNP is determined to deliver independence. What the First Minister didn't tell the Chamber was that independence would result in cuts to public spending in Scotland of £7.2 billion. £7.2 billion. That's the equivalent of half of the entire NHS budget in Scotland. If this was a programme for government for an independent Scotland, the First Minister would not be announcing a transformational capital investment programme, because that is based on UK government capital funding, a Scottish National Investment Bank, because that is being funded by UK Treasury financial transactions money, extra NHS and education spending, because that is being funded by extra Barnett consequentials as a result of extra UK government spending. Instead, the First Minister would be explaining to the people of Scotland why and how £7.2 billion is being cut from the budget in Scotland and what services would have to be slashed as a result of independence. Presiding Officer, in the months ahead, we will be outlining an alternative approach to 12 years of SNP failure. One that will restore Scotland's long-term economic growth to 2%, one that will restore standards in Scottish education, one that will fix the NHS and other public services, and one that will protect and enhance Scotland's place at the heart of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. And I call John Swinney to wind up the debate this afternoon.
Can I begin in closing the debate for the Government this afternoon by welcoming to the Chamber Beatrice Wishart as the member for Shetland and Sarah Boyack here as the member for Lothians Region, filling the vacancies left by Tavish Scott and Kes Dugdale, and wish them both well in their parliamentary experiences here. Sarah Boyack, of course, has formidable experience, which was evident in the enormously thoughtful speech that she delivered, which I shall come back to later on. It was rather difficult to work out from a couple of the contributions whether I had been in attendance at the same statement that the First Minister delivered yesterday. Because if I listened to the contribution of Murdo Fraser and Alec Cole-Hamilton, the contribution of the First Minister apparently was exclusively, unreservedly, entirely and completely dominated by independence. But if I listen to the contributions of Sarah Boyack, or Mark Ruskell, or Monica Lennon, or Liam MacArthur, there was a much deeper appreciation of the substance of what the First Minister said yesterday, which of course did set out the Government's ambition for Scotland to be an independent country. It shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody that the Government's ambition is that Scotland should be an independent country. And of course, with the powers of independence, we could tackle a whole range of issues that are currently out with the responsibility of this Parliament. And I don't see why the Government should in any way be prevented from aspiring to deliver independence, because we believe that will deliver the best outcome for the people of Scotland. And when I look at the fiasco of Westminster, I think I'm absolutely confident the people of Scotland are coming to the same judgment on that important question. Of course.
Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to the Deputy First Minister for giving way. If he's so confident that independence will bring about a more prosperous future for this country, can he describe to the Parliament how he proposes to reduce the 7% national deficit?
John Swinney.
Well, we would make our choices in Scotland about the resources available to us. We would make the policy choices to grow and expand our economy. We would make the policy choices to invest in our infrastructure, and we would be able to reap the rewards of that in the process. That's not available to us under the United Kingdom system at the present moment. And I think my colleague Claire Adamson did us all a great service by outlining the contrast of experiences between what was going on in the Scottish Parliament yesterday and today, as we take forward, and I'm glad that Mr Gray cited all of this, the calm, considered and consensual approach in taking, not words I would ever associate, there's no danger I would associate those three words with Mr Gray at any moment whatsoever. But as we take forward our calm, considered and consensual programme for government, in contrast to the dire emergency situation that is prevailing in the House of Commons just now, under the leadership of, well, supposedly under the leadership of a Conservative government, but it looks like it's under the leadership of a Brexit Party government behaving like Nigel Farage in the way it's conducting itself. So the contrast between the two governments couldn't be greater, which brings me to the substance of the programme for government. And my colleague Rosanna Cunningham opened the debate this afternoon by setting out the very clear and emphatic programme of leadership that she is deploying to the agenda on tackling climate change, and I'm glad that many of the measures that have been set out in the programme for government have been welcomed across the parliamentary chamber. And of course they'll be the subject of debate and consideration with colleagues in the course of this parliamentary year. But I thought Angela Constance made a substantive point when she made the argument that climate change and the action on climate change could not be something that was taken forward in one compartment of government, but had to be taken forward right across the policy spectrum, and I assure Parliament of the determination of the government to do exactly that. But Angela Constance also went on to make an important link in that spirit of the comment that she was making there between the relationships between welfare reform inflicted upon us by the United Kingdom government, where universal credit is making the ability of our citizens to properly and effectively feed themselves, where their reliance on food banks is increasing, to make that connection to the policy agenda of this government, but it also makes the connection to the policy of the agenda of this government to make sure that we have a fair, civilised, respectful approach which underpins the approach of the Social Security Secretary in establishing Social Security Scotland, and to make sure that how we take forward our social security responsibilities is done in a fashion that meets the needs of our people in a civilised and supportive way. The second major theme of the programme for government is on education. And I want to cover a few of the points in relation to the arguments debated here. There has been a questioning of whether we are making progress in closing the poverty-related attainment gap. And let me demonstrate to Parliament why that is the case. At SCQF levels 3, 4, 5 and 6, the gap in attainment between the most deprived and the least deprived pupils in our country is narrowing, is reduced. At level 3 from 5.3% to 3.2%, at level 4 from 11.3 to 6.1, at level 5 from 33.3 to 20.3, and at level 6 from 45.6 to 37.4. And then crucially, the gap between the percentage of school leavers from the most to the least deprived communities, the gap between them has halved from 14.6% to 6.8%, meaning that more and more of our young people from deprived backgrounds are going on to the positive destinations that we want to see them going on to as a consequence of their education. And that is the evidence of the attainment gap closing. It's why I'm also so pleased that the Finance Secretary has given agreement to extend the Scottish Attainment Challenge beyond 2021 to at least March 2022, which gives funding certainty to support the measures being taken right throughout the education system to close the poverty-related attainment gap and to make a positive impact on the life chances of young people in our society. And in the process of doing that, we must be alert to the challenges of ensuring that all young people have the skills that are required in the labour market. And Mr Neil's points in the debate about the focus necessary on skills in IT and in construction are crucial elements of what the government must take forward in its future priorities. The third major area I want to concentrate on is the commitments given by the government in the programme for government towards care-experienced young people, some of the most vulnerable young people in our society who face the greatest of challenges. We promised those care-experienced young people that we would not wait until the care review produced its report, but that we would take whatever action we could take at the earliest available opportunity to address their issues. So I'm delighted that we've been able to remove the age limit on the care-experienced bursary, making it clear to individuals who are care-experienced that there is a place for them in our further and higher education systems when they get to the point at which they can contribute in that way. And that secondly, we've been able to remove the costs for dental care to make sure something that care-experienced young people raised with us and said mattered to them is something that we can put in place as a consequence of the government's programme. And the last area is the link between housing and inequality that was raised by Sarah Boyack in what I thought was an excellent contribution to the debate. The government is undertaking a sustained investment in social housing in Scotland. We are on track to deliver 50,000 affordable homes, including 35,000 for social rent by 2021, backed by record investment of more than £3.3 billion. That's the type of commitment necessary to ensure we have a housing infrastructure that supports individuals, meets the challenges they face in life, provides the housing for those who have a drug addiction, who require our support, not just in dealing with their drug addiction, but in the wider support around housing, employability and other aspects of life to ensure that they can fulfil their potential. These are the measures of a rounded programme for government, which, as the First Minister characterised it at the weekend, is represented by the calm leadership, the considered leadership, the consensual leadership of this government, and those are the attributes that we will take forward in the period going forward. I was struck in the debate by the willingness of opposition members to attack the progress that the government is making in our policy commitments. But over the course of the last year, we have delivered 5 different social security payments to support some of the most vulnerable in our society. We have demonstrated the investment that is coming forward to expand early learning and childcare, with 20,000 children accessing expanded funded early learning and childcare already. The work of the Attainment Challenge is now investing £182 million in supporting investment in our schools to meet the needs of young people. We've seen increased funding in the National Health Service. We've seen investment in major trauma centres in Dundee and Aberdeen. We've taken forward commitments to green transport. We've taken forward our commitments to fair work, embedding that in the work of government. That is what the government has achieved in the last 12 months. The programme for government builds on it, and we will continue to deliver for the people that sent us here to create a fairer and a more prosperous Scotland.
Thank you very much, and that concludes our debate on the Scottish Government's programme for government. The next item is consideration of Business Motion 18684 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, and could I call on Graham Day to move the motion setting out a business programme?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. No member wishes to speak on this motion. The question therefore is that motion 18684 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The next item is consideration of business motions 18644, 18685, 18686 and 18687 on the stage 1 timetables for 3 bills. Could I call on Graham Day to move these motions?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And again, no one wishes to speak on the motions. Therefore, the question is that motions 18644, 18685, 18686 and 18687 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And the next item is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 18643 on the designation of a lead committee. And could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Moved, Presiding
Thank you very much. And we turn now to decision time. The question is that motion 18643 in the name of Graham Day on designation of a lead committee be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that concludes decision time. We're going to move now to, or shortly, to members' business in the name of Joan McAlpine on celebrating Hamish Henderson. We'll just take a few moments, however, for members and the Minister to change seats.